They called him Sporus. But first, they cut him, not for healing, not for punishment, for love, or something darker than love. Emperor Nero, Rome's final Julio-Claudian ruler, drowning in paranoia and decadence, ordered a teenage boy to be castrated, dressed in silk, and paraded as his bride. A child's body carved by imperial desire. Imagine it, Roman torches blazing as the boy walks beside the emperor, his eyes hollow, his fate sealed in gold and blood. The crowds whispered, the Senate turned their gaze, but no one intervened. Why did Nero do this? Why take a child and erase him? The answer does not begin in the marriage, it begins in the ashes. Ashes of a woman, ashes of a womb. Poppaea Sabina was everything Nero desired, beauty, ambition, and the fire to mold a Caesar. But beauty in Rome was a blade, double-edged and unforgiving. In a rage one night, Nero kicked her pregnant body until silence replaced her cries. Her unborn child died, so did she. Regret came too late. The palace walls absorbed her ghost. Nero mourned her with madness. He blamed fate, he blamed Rome, but inside, something cracked. Then he saw the boy, Sporus. Slender features, wide frightened eyes, a breath of resemblance to the wife he had killed. Obsession bloomed from guilt. He would not lose Poppaea again, not to death, not to memory. He would remake her, in flesh, in ritual, in blood. The boy became the mirror. Ceremony followed, a wedding in name only, between emperor and echo. As guests cheered hollow togas and false vows, Sporus stood silent, a child sacrificed not with a knife, but with kisses. From that moment on, Sporus was no longer a boy. He was Poppaea's ghost, painted and perfumed, forced to sit beside the man who destroyed what he now pretended to cherish. Nero made him wear jewels that once belonged to the empress. At banquets, senators bowed to him as they once did to her. Behind their masks of civility lay revulsion, but no one spoke. Power had made silence a habit, and yet, even in silence, whispers grew. The court, the people, the handlers of Rome's legacy began to wonder, was the emperor mad or cursed? Sporus, still a child in years, carried on his bones the delusion of an empire in decline. Each night he was summoned. Each night he became her. Memory masquerading as love, guilt dressed in lace and agony. And yet he never wept. Or if he did, history erased it. Only the flicker in his eyes betrayed the truth. He was alive, but his life did not belong to him. As Nero's delusions deepened, his empire cracked beneath him. Revolts flared, rivals circled. Rome, once drunk on power, now trembled on the edge of collapse. And still, Sporus remained at his side, living proof of the emperor's spiral. When Nero fled the capital, hunted by his enemies and abandoned by allies, he took Sporus with him, not out of love, but possession. A dying man clutching a phantom, desperate to preserve one lie in the face of every truth. In his final days, Nero, once god to millions, hid like a thief in a borrowed villa. Nearby, Sporus watched in silence, only 19, yet old with horror. As soldiers closed in, the emperor lifted a dagger to his throat. He hesitated. Cowardice or clarity, no one knows. Then he begged, not Rome, not the gods. He turned to Sporus and whimpered, "What an artist dies in me." And with one last breath, he collapsed, not into legend, into disgrace. But Sporus's nightmare did not end with Nero's death. He became spoils of empire, passed like a cursed relic from one contender to the next. First to Nymphidius Sabinus, Nero's former bodyguard turned false heir, who dressed Sporus in robes and called him empress before being butchered by his own soldiers. Then Otho, then Vitellius. Each man saw in Sporus not a person but a symbol of legitimacy, of scandal, of Nero's broken crown, and Sporus endured. With each hand that seized him, his identity twisted further, until even his name dissolved into whispered shame. Finally, under Emperor Vitellius, a mock wedding was staged, public humiliation masquerading as theater. Before a jeering Roman crowd, Sporus was forced to relive his violation, not as victim but as jest. He begged for death. He who had once been a ghost finally sought to disappear. Before it could be staged again, he took his own life, not in grandeur, in silence. A boy cut twice, first by Nero, then by history. But silence does not erase suffering. History remembers Nero as a madman, a pyromaniac, a tyrant, fiddling above flames. But Sporus, his pain became a footnote, his name a shadow beneath imperial tragedy. In the ruins of Rome's opulence, a boy was broken to fulfill an emperor's fantasy, and the echo of that cruelty stretches beyond marble or time. What is left of Sporus? No tomb, no monument, no portrait carved in stone. Just fragments, whispers in scrolls, the ghost of a child wandering through historians' margins, and perhaps that is the greatest horror of all, not that he was destroyed, but that he was forgotten. Rome burned once, but beneath its ashes lay quieter fires, fires that took no cities, claimed no thrones, but scorched a single soul. His story, once shamed, now surfaces not for vengeance, but remembrance, because some nightmares, no matter how deeply buried, demand to be known. And yet, it is not only Sporus's suffering that haunts us, but the silence of all those who enabled it. Senators who nodded, poets who praised, crowds who cheered not out of love but fear. Rome, in its grandeur, built monuments to conquests, but buried its victims in shadows. Who speaks for the erased? The palace that once echoed with Nero's twisted devotion now stands in ruin. The voices that once chanted his name have long fallen silent, but behind the silence there is still a cry, a whisper of the unspoken. Sporus was not just a symbol nor a shadow. He was a child. He was longing. He was terror, torn open for the whims of a god who bled like any man. In remembering him, we peel back the gold paint of empire to glimpse the rot beneath. Some stories are too cruel to celebrate, but too human to ignore. Remember him, not with pity, but with unflinching truth. Because Sporus was not alone. In him, history reflects the countless faceless, nameless souls devoured by ambition cloaked as destiny. His agony echoes in every corner of Rome's decadence, a brutal reminder that beneath the marble, beneath the myth, were fragile lives bent to power's will. His was a sacrifice unchosen, endured under the weight of golden laurels and bloodied laurel wreaths. We look back at Rome and praise its art, its law, its legacy. But what of its victims? What of the child turned bride, turned relic, turned ghost? Sporus stands as Rome's silent conscience. Against the thunder of chariots and the roar of the Colosseum, his story is a whisper, but one that won't die. Because his nightmare is not just history, it's warning, memory, a demand. That greatness never again masquerade as cruelty. That no empire, no matter how grand, forget who it dared to destroy, just to feel immortal. Some say Sporus faded, that his name dissolved into dust like the ashes of palaces now swallowed by time. But the truth? He lingers. In every story we now dare tell about those history tried to erase, he is the haunting breath behind the statue's gaze, the quiet terror beneath Nero's spectacles of grandeur. He is the question asked in the stillness of ruins: what price was paid for beauty, for legacy, for empire? His ruin was not made in battle, but in a marriage. Not with swords, but ceremony. Not for Rome's glory, but its shame. Today, we walk among marble monuments and forget the blood beneath. But Sporus reminds us there were victims too small to be remembered, too broken to be carved into stone. And still, they mattered. Because they were human, because they were here, and because even a whisper, when true, can survive the roar of empires. So when we speak of emperors and conquests, of triumphal arches and eternal cities, let us not forget the boy beneath the crown. Not all of history's tragedies are written in wars. Some are whispered in chambers, cloaked in silks, and crowned with garlands of grief. Sporus was not a ruler, nor a rebel. He left no kingdom, fought no battle, but in the crumbling silence of a fallen empire, he remains a testament to the forgotten, the forsaken, the ones history chose not to name. His suffering is not a spectacle, but a mirror. Held steady, it reflects all the cost buried beneath civilization's sheen. This is not just Sporus's story. It is Rome's, and perhaps ours. A boy stolen by power, a soul erased for glory. A voice, long silenced, now heard. At last, the ghost becomes memory, and the memory becomes truth. No more whispers. His name was Sporus, and he was not nothing. History often records the victors, the schemers, the tyrants, but it is in stories like Sporus's that we meet the rawest truths of empire, not in the strategies of generals, but in the trembling of a boy forced into the skin of the dead. His tale is neither myth nor rumor, but a caution carved in silence. In the dark corridors of Nero's reign, Sporus was the echo of guilt, the mannequin of mourning, the price of a man's descent into madness wielded as ceremony. We talk of power and rarely ask what does it cost and who pays its price. Sporus paid in screams unheard, in glances avoided, in memories no one dared capture. He did not rise, he did not fall, he was taken. And though Rome did not build a statue to mourn him, perhaps its ruins are enough, because among collapsed stone and forgotten names, one truth still lingers. Humanity, once shattered, always speaks, even if only in a whisper. And so, Sporus remains more than a relic, less than a memory etched into the fault lines of Rome's grandeur and descent. He teaches us that cruelty thrives not in chaos alone, but in pageantry, in rituals stripped of truth, in kisses used like daggers. His silence was not surrender, it was endurance. The kind of endurance history forgets but never truly erases. When empires collapse, their echoes scatter through art, law, ruin. But in Sporus's broken story, we hear the blood beat beneath it all. A boy rewritten as symbol, suffering performed as spectacle, and sorrow endured not for some mythic legacy, but because no one stopped it. That is why Sporus matters, because behind every fresco, every triumphal arch, lies someone like him unseen, unheard, unhealed. And when we tell his story, we do not only remember him, we restore something rare, something Rome could conquer, but never kill. Our capacity to see the human beneath the legend, to listen, and finally, to never look away again. Because to forget Sporus is to forget what history costs, when written only by the powerful. His name may not appear carved into triumphal monuments, nor sung in the scrolls of generals, but it survives in the quiet tremor of conscience that still stirs when we hear his story. He forces us to confront a truth that no empire can erase, that beneath every glorious conquest lies a body hidden in shadow, unnamed but not unliving. And that legacy, the legacy of suffering endured in silence, matters. It must matter. Sporus's nightmare is not just a tale of Rome. It is a mirror held to every age that confuses glory with cruelty, ambition with abuse, love with possession. To remember him is not a gesture of pity. It is a vow that in the empire of memory, no voice be silenced, no pain buried beneath marble, no child left unnamed. His name was Sporus. Never forget it. And that vow, it does not rest in Rome alone. It belongs to all who have loved and lost without being seen, to every life bent by power's careless hands. Sporus was one, but he speaks for many. His pain is the underside of every monument, the breath caught beneath every anthem of greatness. Even now, when we step through museums or marvel at marble ruins, we must ask, what stories were carved out to build this beauty? Who was forgotten to make memory shine? Sporus teaches us to question the silence, to interrogate awe, to listen harder, because empires fall, statues crumble. But justice, if it can be called that, begins with remembrance. Not abstract, not distant, but frighteningly close. A boy, a name, a whisper that cut deeper than any sword. His story forces history to bleed. And in that wound, truth speaks not for applause, not for shame, but for dignity, the kind that no cruelty can ever take again. So we remember Sporus, not as ornament or afterthought, but as the living refusal to let suffering be swallowed by spectacle. His name, once hidden beneath brocade and shame, now surfaces with purpose. In every classroom that dares name cruelty for what it was, in every quiet moment when a forgotten soul is given voice, Sporus endures. He was not empire, not emperor, not even rebellion. He was a boy caught between grief and grandeur, used until used up and still, his pain speaks louder than Nero's legacy. Because power, unchecked, always asks the same question: who must be broken for me to feel divine? And through Sporus we answer: no one should, no child, no soul. History will always be written by the strong, but it is the stories of the broken that make it worth reading. His name was Sporus, and now, at last, he is heard. Let that truth echo longer than any empire ever could. Sporus teaches us that cruelty doesn't always wear a soldier's armor or a tyrant's crown. Sometimes it's draped in velvet, spoken in vows, masked as love. And when we trace the jagged thread of his life, we are not just encountering a Roman tragedy, we are confronting our own reflections. What power does to the powerless, what memory does for the voiceless. In the end, Sporus does not ask for our tears. He asks for our recognition, our courage to look closely at beauty without looking away from its cost. His story lives in the silences that follow loud histories, in the ache behind triumph, the tremble beneath spectacle. In Sporus, we do not find a hero, but we find something deeper, the fragile, flickering humanity that survives even history's darkest corridors. And perhaps, in remembering him not as myth, not as metaphor, but as the boy he was, we recover more than a name. We recover the soul of history itself. And so, what began in a palace of gold ends in a silence heavier than stone. Sporus, carved from a child into an image, draped in borrowed grief, was not merely the victim of a mad emperor, but the quiet revelation of how empires truly fall, not always with banners or blades, but with each life twisted to feed illusion. His story is a testament buried beneath triumph, a flicker behind torches meant to blind. If history has any justice, it is in the voices we choose to revive. Not for spectacle, not for legend, but for truth. Sporus's truth is one of endurance without applause, humanity without monument. As we turn away from the opulence of Rome, may we carry him with us not as a shadow, but as the reminder that where memory dares to care, the forgotten are never truly lost. His name was Sporus. Say it again. Let the silence around it finally be broken. Because, in the end, Sporus is not a relic of Rome's cruelty, he is its reckoning. His story endures not because it was written in golden letters, but because it was etched in pain. He forces us to ask who we forget when we celebrate greatness, and what we glorify when we ignore grief. Through Sporus, we are reminded that history judged by statues alone is blind, and that true remembrance requires more than names, it requires empathy. As marble fades and empires fall, one truth remains. Humanity, in its most broken, still reaches for dignity. Sporus's name may have been silenced by emperors, erased by cronies, laughed at by mobs, but time has lifted it again. Into our hearing, into our keeping, his story is not over, because wherever a soul was used and dismissed, wherever suffering was buried beneath splendor, there too Sporus walks, not as ghost, but as the conscience we can no longer ignore. So let history mark this not as a tale of madness, nor merely of empire, but as a memorial to a single life disfigured in pursuit of power's illusion. Sporus was not born to be a martyr, nor destined to be remembered. Yet through the cruel theater forced upon him, he calls us now not to weep, but to witness. In his voiceless cry, we hear the cost of unchecked dominance, of beauty distorted by grief, of love poisoned by guilt. And in listening, truly listening, we refuse to let his silence be mistaken for consent, his endurance for acceptance. Rome's grandeur is long gone, its gods turned to dust, but Sporus remains, no longer as victim, no longer as shadow, but as the sobering truth that no empire prospers without paying in stolen innocence. Let his name echo beyond the ruins. Let it rise where statues fall. In memory reborn, in pain made sacred. His name was Sporus, and now, finally, he belongs to history not as a footnote, but as its fierce, unflinching heart. Let this be the final reckoning, not for Nero, whose madness collapsed beneath the weight of its own lies, not even for Rome, whose marble still gleams, though its soul has long vanished, but for Sporus, for the boy who bore an empire's sickness in silence. He was not a warrior, yet his suffering carved deeper than any sword. He left no philosophy, yet his truth shames every triumph inscribed in stone. His life reminds us that the cost of civilization often lies in the unnoticed corners, where the innocent are reshaped into symbols for others to wield. And in refusing to forget him, we declare something timeless, that memory can be justice, and truth can outlive empire. Beneath the ruins, beyond the glory, behind the myths, they cannot hide him anymore. His story demands to be known, to be named, to be mourned. His name was Sporus, and in the silence he leaves behind, we finally hear everything we once refused to see. This is the reckoning Sporus deserved, not in marble, not in scrolls, but in memory unflinching, throat wide and honest. We cannot uncarve the wounds left behind by Nero's fantasy, but in choosing to see Sporus not as ornament, not as aberration, but as a human with breath, with fear, with hope, we reclaim a fragment of justice from history's cold indifference. His was never a story of power, but of its violent aftermath. Not a tale of glory, but of what glory silences to preserve itself. Let us not append his name to Nero's legacy, but lift it above, untangled from madness, radiating its own fragile truth. He did not live to see compassion, but now, through remembrance, he becomes its symbol. A boy once rewritten by an emperor, now restored by time. Sporus, a name long buried, now awakened, not to haunt, but to teach, not to beg, but to stand. And in that standing, even in ruin, there is power, there is humanity, there is finally peace. So we end not with the grandeur of emperors or the echo of colosseums, but with the quiet, enduring presence of Sporus, a figure pressed flat by history, yet now, rising with every retelling. He was not just a casualty of Rome's decay, but its most intimate mirror, a boy caught in a tragedy too bleak for legend, too haunting to forget. Through him, we remember that history is more than relics and records. It is human anguish and human resilience. Sporus could not alter the world that consumed him, but his story, revived now in the hearts and minds of those willing to see beyond myth, becomes a torch we carry against forgetting. This was the cost of an emperor's obsession. This was the truth behind gilded masks. His name was Sporus. Say it, and let it mean more than survival. Let it mean clarity, dignity, remembrance. For in remembering Sporus, we remember ourselves, the fragile, broken, enduring heart at the center of every empire that ever dared to rule. Let this not be the end of Sporus, but the beginning of how we remember differently. Not through the lens of conquest or power, but through the quiet reckoning of empathy. He was not a myth born to be mourned, nor a footnote to feed our fascination with fallen emperors. He was a boy who suffered because others refused to see, and now, because we see him, truly see him, his name holds the weight of truth. The kind of truth that outlives monuments, that glows, steady and solemn, where triumphs dim. Sporus does not return for our sorrow. He returns to insist that history must feel, must reckon, must change. So say his name once more, not to close his story, but to carry it forward. Sporus, a whisper that endured a scream, a shadow that became light, a wound that teaches the world to never look at silence the same way again. This is how memory becomes justice. And as that light flickers on in the corridors of history, casting its glow against walls once smeared with gold and silence, Sporus walks with us. Not as a ghost, but as a reminder that behind every myth stands a truth desperately waiting to be heard. He was not powerful, he was not free, but what he was, human, hurting, unheard, carries the weight of 1,000 forgotten names. His memory does not call for vengeance, only presence, only the courage to say, this too was Rome, this too was history. And in that shaping, perhaps a future forms a future, where power no longer feeds on the voiceless, where beauty is not carved from agony. Sporus's story is the scar we trace to know how deep cruelty can go, and how far truth must rise to meet it. His name was Sporus. Say it, know it, carry it. Not as tragedy alone, but as the conscience that will not let empire forget its cost. And now, with only echoes left to answer our listening, we offer Sporus not restoration but reckoning. His voice, once crushed beneath silk and pageant, rises from the cracks in history's polished veneer. He was the silence screaming behind empire's applause, the child caged within a crown that never fit. In him we see every forgotten, misused soul coerced into the spectacle of power. His name, once twisted by tyrants into theater, now becomes a mirror held to us all. What we do with his story defines us. Not Nero, not Rome, us. In Sporus, we are asked one last question. When given the choice, will we revere only the victors, or will we also mourn the cost? His story ends not in grandeur, but in the quiet promise that every child's suffering, if heard, can change how we remember, how we see, how we dare to build something better. His name was Sporus, and now, at last, he is not alone. Because in the final measure of empire, it is not the marble that remains, but the memory of those crushed beneath it. Sporus was not a hero etched in glory, nor a villain reviled in prose. He was a boy used by men who mistook pain for power. But in giving him voice, even now, we plant something imperishable, not a statue, but a seed of conscience, of care, of courage to face the stories that wound us into wisdom. Rome no longer speaks. Its emperors lie silent. Yet from their ruins, Sporus calls not for resurrection, but for recognition, that every life twisted by power still casts a shadow, still whispers through time. May his name never be buried again. Let it rise with the morning, linger in classrooms, echo in quiet halls where truth is spoken. Sporus, a name once stolen, now returned. And in that return, we find not Rome's shame, though it is vast, but humanity's awakening. This is where empire ends, and understanding begins. So let this final ember burn not with rage, but with remembrance. Sporus does not rest in cathedrals or lie crowned in tombs built for gods. He lives only in what we choose to remember and what we swear never to forget. Through his agonizing journey, he illuminates the fragility of the powerless pressed beneath empires that call themselves eternal. His was not a grand life, but a true one marked by pain most could not bear. And yet, he bore it, not in chosen defiance, but in cruel endurance. That is what makes his name sacred, not glory, not victory, but survival in the face of history's indifference. So as the last candle flickers against the stone walls of this story, let us speak his name one final time. Sporus, a boy, a wound, a truth. And in that fragile, flickering truth, everything history once tried to hide now stands revealed. That is how we end, with light, with his name. And so, this is where Sporus's story rests, not in the silence of stone, nor the shadows of forgotten scrolls, but here, in the breath between one heartbeat and the next. A name once drowned beneath gold and cruelty rises not merely as an echo, but a vow carved deep into conscience. Let other emperors be remembered in their ruins. Let Nero crumble beneath the weight of his own delusion. But let Sporus endure as the child broken without reason, and the memory restored with reverence. For in every age there will be power, and there will be silence. Sporus reminds us what happens when silence wins. But in speaking his name one last time, we refuse to let the silence return. This was never about legend, it was always about cost. His name was Sporus, and now he is more than memory. He is warning, he is witness. And where his name is carried, cruelty is no longer invisible. It is remembered, and remembrance is power. So let Sporus remain not as a whisper lost to empire, but as the voice we carry forward into every tale of power told too loudly. His journey was not chosen, his suffering never justified, but in unveiling it, we chip away at the myth of imperial divinity. We remind ourselves that every monument casts a shadow, and in those shadows dwell lives like his, erased to preserve the gleam of triumph. Sporus was not a symbol of resilience, he was a cry never meant to be needed, and yet he endured, not for legacy, not for history, but because he had no choice. That is why, as we turn from Rome's ruins into our own crumbling certainties, we must carry him not as ornament, not as ending, but as reminder that every empire's weight bears down on someone unseen. Let us lift that weight now, in thought, in memory, in name. His name was Sporus. May it never fall silent again. And thus, with the name Sporus still trembling in the air, we close not the tale, but the wound it opened in us. His life stolen, shaped, shattered, becomes not just a story of Rome, but a mirror for every power that forgets its people, every legacy built on the backs of the unseen. There will always be empires, always grandeur, always monuments narrating only half the truth. But for every stone that boasts conquest, there must be a voice that remembers the cost. Sporus is that voice. Fragile, yes, but clear, endless. When all the noise of emperors has faded, and glory lies cracked and dusted, what remains is this: a boy, unnamed, unarmed, unprotected, and remembered. For in him we reclaim not just a stolen life, but a measure of our own humanity. Let history hear him. Let the world never forget. His name was Sporus, and now, in full truth, he lives. For history to truly speak, it must whisper the names of those it once ignored. Sporus was not meant to be remembered. He was meant to be erased, lost in silk-wrapped silence, vanished beneath marble lies. But now, in naming him, in telling his story fully and without flinching, we do more than honor the past. We change how it speaks to the future. His was a life without justice, but not without meaning. In his suffering, we uncover clarity. In his endurance, we reclaim truth. So let this be the last silence broken, the final shadow lit. His name was Sporus. A boy used, then discarded, but no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. Let him live not in tragedy, but in truth, not in silence, but in voices that now dare to see. Empires fall, stones decay, but memory, sharpened by justice, can endure. And Sporus, carved now into memory, speaks at last with a voice power could never possess, the voice of undeniable human truth. So let Sporus be the closing note, not of sorrow but of sight of eyes now open to the truth beneath the shimmer of thrones. His name is no longer buried in footnotes or cloaked in shame. It rises, luminous, from the darkest fold of empire's legacy, demanding not pity, but presence. In remembering Sporus, we do not rewrite the past, we reckon with it. We ensure that behind every tale of greatness, there pulses the heartbeat of those once cast aside. His story ends because it must, but let its memory begin anew in every voice that dares to lift the forgotten into the light. This is what it means to learn from history, not to marvel uncritically, but to see fully. Sporus, a name once forced into silence, now spoken in truth. Let that truth endure not because it is easy, but because it is just. And in that justice, he is no longer a shadow. He is seen, he is known, he is finally remembered. And so, with breath held in the dimming light of empire, we let Sporus stand not beneath frescoes or among gods, but in the full clarity of remembrance. His life, quieted by power and obscured by spectacle, now becomes a flame passed hand to hand, heart to heart. In him, we find not the echo of a forgotten Rome, but the pulse of truth that endures where empires fall. Let every child forced into silence, every soul buried beneath stories carved in conquest, rise with his name. Because history, when spoken honestly, is not about heroes or tyrants, it is about what we choose to carry forward. Not just stone, but spirit. Not just victory, but voices. So let this be our vow, carved not in marble, but in memory. His name was Sporus, and as long as it is spoken, the pain he bore will never return to shadow. In that voice, in that light, he lives, fully, finally, forever. This, then, is how empires are truly remembered, not in their monuments, but in the names they tried to bury. Sporus was never meant to be history's voice, yet now he is its clearest, not through grandeur or rebellion, but through the quiet defiance of being remembered. A boy recast in cruelty, bound by silence, now walks through time unshackled by shame. He is not just Rome's reckoning, but humanity's reminder that memory, wielded with compassion, is the sharpest justice we can offer. Let every future that dares to rise on the rubble of others be forced to speak his name, loudly, reverently, and without forgetting the cry beneath it. Sporus, not legend, not myth, but truth, and in truth, eternal.